I was the only human for billions of kilometers. At least, that's what the contract said. Outpost K-47 hung in permanent twilight above an ice moon that had never seen a sunrise. The gas giant it orbited swallowed the sky, a banded wall of rust and cream stretching from horizon to horizon. The station itself was an old mineral relay platform, half refinery, half data vault, left behind when the Empire rerouted its shipping lanes 2 centuries ago. Now it was classified as legacy infrastructure. That meant no one important wanted it, but it was too valuable to scrap. That's where I came in. I'm not a soldier, not a diplomat, just a systems maintenance contractor licensed for obsolete alien architecture. My job was simple: keep the reactors balanced, the cryovaults powered, and the automated mining drones from freezing into decorative statues. 6-month rotation. Hazard bonus. Solitude pay. The station hummed constantly, low-frequency vibrations through metal decking, like a distant storm that never arrived. The air smelled faintly of ionized coolant and recycled dust. Frost grew in delicate crystalline veins along bulkhead seams where insulation had degraded. Every few hours, the ice moon below cracked with tectonic stress, and the sound traveled up through the docking pylons like bones popping in the cold. I didn't mind the quiet. Machines were predictable. They broke in measurable ways. Which is why I noticed immediately when something didn't. At 3:17 station cycle, Reactor 3 adjusted its output by 0.7%. No scheduled demand increase. No drone launch. No cryo-cycle shift. Just a brief, deliberate spike. As if something had woken up and drawn a breath. Reactor 3's anomaly traced back to a sector that wasn't on my standard maintenance grid. Sublevel 9. According to the public schematics, Sublevel 9 didn't exist. The access hatch was behind a thermal shielding panel I'd inspected twice before without noticing the seam. The station's architecture wasn't human, its corridors curved at uncomfortable angles, walls grown from alloy composites that looked poured rather than welded. But this section felt deliberate. Sealed. The hatch recognized my contractor override after a 3-second delay that felt longer than it should have. The door irised open without a sound. The air beyond was colder. Not station cold. Preserved cold. My boots rang softly against the floor as I stepped into a corridor too clean for a relic platform. No frost veins. No exposed conduit bundles. The walls were smooth, uninterrupted, faintly luminous with embedded filament lines that pulsed in slow synchronization. There was no dust. No hum of ventilation. No micro-vibrations from distant machinery. It felt like a cemetery without death. At the end of the corridor, the space opened into a chamber large enough to dock a frigate. My breath fogged as I stepped inside. Rows. Hundreds of them. Cryogenic vaults arranged in concentric arcs, stacked 3 tiers high. Each pod was elongated, transparent along the upper third, built to house a body just slightly taller than average human proportions. Frost clung to the inside surfaces in delicate lattices. 1,000 silent silhouettes. The lighting was dim but precise, focus strips illuminating each vault as if they were exhibits in a museum no one visited anymore. I moved closer to the nearest row. They weren't human. Their features were sharper, more refined, elongated limbs, high cheek structures, hair suspended in frozen waves around their heads like dark halos. Their skin carried a faint opalescent sheen beneath the frost. Women. All of them. My wrist console vibrated softly. Unauthorized population registry detected. Cryo-stasis array. 1,000 occupants. Status. Imperial preservation mandate. Security lock. Dormant. Preservation. That wasn't a word used for volunteers. I walked along the row, boots echoing in the vast chamber. Every pod displayed identical readouts, 0 neural activity, metabolic stasis at absolute minimum. Except one. Pod 347A. Its indicator pulsed faint amber instead of blue. Minimal neural fluctuation detected. Stability threshold. Declining. I crouched beside it. The being inside looked no different from the others, but the frost along her pod window had partially receded, revealing closed eyelids with faint movement beneath. The system interface projected beside me, unprompted. Manual intervention available. Test revival sequence, Single unit. Warning. Activation voids preservation compliance. I stared at the prompt. This wasn't my job. My contract covered reactors, drones, structural decay, not ancient Imperial vaults hidden under false schematics. The Empire might be centuries removed from this station, but their legal algorithms weren't. If this was an archive, Waking One could trigger a beacon. If it was a prison, I leaned back on my heels. Alone for billions of kilometers. No oversight. No witnesses. The amber indicator flickered again. Neural instability increasing. If I did nothing, Pod 347A would fail. Permanently. It wasn't a heroic moment. There was no swelling music in my head. Just a calculation. One life already degrading. One system anomaly already drawing power. One button labeled Test Revival. I exhaled slowly. Maintenance, I muttered to the empty chamber. That's all. My finger hovered for a second longer than necessary. Then I pressed it. The pod responded instantly. Frost shattered in a web of crystalline fractures. Internal lights flared white. Liquid coolant drained in violent spirals, hissing as it met the chamber air. Inside, her body convulsed once, sharp, involuntary. The lid split along a seam and lifted with a soft hydraulic sigh. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then her eyes opened. They were luminous silver. And they locked directly onto me. She didn't gasp. She didn't scream. She inhaled. Slowly. Deliberately. Like someone surfacing from deep water who already knew which direction was up. Condensation curled around her shoulders as she pushed herself upright inside the pod. Coolant vapor drifted in silver ribbons through the chamber light. Her movements were controlled, economical, no panic, no confusion. Her eyes never left mine. Up close, the opalescent tone of her skin wasn't metallic. It shimmered faintly, like light refracting through thin ice. Dark hair clung damply to her collarbones. She swung her legs over the edge of the pod and stood, taller than I'd first estimated, though her posture carried no threat. The chamber felt smaller with her awake. "You are not Imperial," she said. Her voice was steady. Low. Clear. Not accusing, simply factual. "No," I replied. "Maintenance contractor." She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way I'd studied failing circuitry. Analytical. Precise. Species designation. Human. The word seemed to settle into her thoughts. She stepped down from the pod platform, bare feet touching the cold alloy floor without flinching. "You are alone," she observed. "Yeah." A pause. "You activated my chamber intentionally." "Yes." Another pause, longer this time. Not distrust. Processing. Her gaze traveled over my thermal jacket, my scuffed boots, the diagnostic pad still in my hand. There was no fear in her expression. No hostility. Only a quiet curiosity that felt strangely disarming. "Why?" she asked. I considered lying, saying it was a systems test. An accident. But something about the way she watched me made dishonesty feel inefficient. "Your pod was destabilizing," I said. "You were going to die." She absorbed that without visible reaction. Then she stepped closer. Not threateningly. Just closer. The air between us carried the sterile chill of cryo-stasis and the faint scent of ionized coolant. She lifted her hand, slowly enough that I had time to move away. I didn't. Her fingers brushed the back of my glove. The contact was light. Experimental. Warm. Her eyes widened by a fraction. "You are unshielded." "Mostly," I said. She turned her hand, pressing her palm more firmly against mine. The warmth was real, steady, alive. Not preserved. Not suspended. "Your species persists without stasis?" "Yeah." "We just keep going." Something shifted in her expression then. Not admiration. Not surprise. Interest. Behind us, the other pods remained dark and silent. 1,000 preserved lives frozen in perfect stillness. But the chamber no longer felt like a cemetery. It felt like a room waiting. She didn't withdraw her hand immediately. And for the first time since taking the contract, I realized something uncomfortable. I didn't want the station to be empty again. Her name, I learned, was Sally's. Not a title. Not a rank. Just a name. She stood beside me as I accessed the chamber interface again. The system no longer displayed preservation warnings. Instead, it had shifted to adaptive mode, monitoring the revived unit's vitals and recalibrating environmental controls. "You cannot leave the others," Sally said quietly, her gaze sweeping across the endless arcs of frozen figures. It wasn't an accusation. It was a truth. "I don't even know who put you here," I replied. "Or why." "The Empire," she said, and something cold, not physical, but historical, moved through her tone. "We were removed. Preserved. Stored. Prisoners." She considered. "Assets." That was worse. Pod 347, B pulsed faintly on the display. Neural readiness. Optimal. Structural integrity. Stable. Sally's looked at me, not commanding, but waiting. "You understand," she said, "that if you begin this, you alter the balance of this station." I gave a small, humorless exhale. That balance already shifted. I pressed the second activation key. This time, I didn't hesitate. The second woman awakened violently. The pod split open and she surged upright before the coolant had fully drained, breath sharp, muscles coiled. Her eyes ignited, bright silver edged with something fiercer. She stepped out in one fluid motion, posture aggressive, scanning the chamber with instinctive threat assessment. When her gaze landed on me, she didn't soften. "Identify command authority," she demanded. "No command," I said evenly. "Just me." Her eyes flicked to Sally's. Recognition passed between them. "Sally's," she said, voice lowering a fraction. "Vale," Sally's replied. Vale's attention returned to me, studying my stance, my lack of weaponry, the absence of armor. "You are physically unimposing," Vale stated. "Noted," I said. For a heartbeat, I thought she might challenge me, push, test, dominate the space. Instead, she stepped past me, scanning the chamber perimeter like a sentinel reactivating after a long war. Every movement carried contained power. Fire without chaos. "Security grids are dormant," she said. "External sensors minimal. This structure is neglected. Maintenance budget cuts," I muttered. She looked at me again, this time less as a variable and more as a factor. "You released us." "Yes." "Why?" Sally's answered before I could. "He chose not to let me terminate." Vale's expression shifted, subtle, but real. Not gratitude. Assessment. The third pod opened more gently. Her revival was gradual, breathing shallow at first, then deepening. When her eyes opened, there was no sharp intake, no defensive posture. She looked confused only for a moment before clarity returned. She stepped down carefully, as if mindful of the space itself. "Elira," Sally said softly. Elira smiled faintly at the sound of her name. Her gaze found me last. Unlike Vale's fire or Sally's steady intelligence, Elira's attention carried warmth, an awareness of details. She noticed the frost forming along my jacket seams. The slight tremor in my fingers from adrenaline I hadn't admitted to feeling. "You are cold," she observed gently. "I'm fine." Without asking, she adjusted a nearby environmental control node, raising the chamber temperature by 2 degrees. The shift was immediate but subtle. "Now you are more fine," she said. Vale made a small sound that might have been disapproval or reluctant amusement. They were different. Sally's, calm anchor. Centered. Thinking 3 moves ahead. Vale, controlled flame. Protective. Ready to confront threats that no longer existed. Elira, quiet care. Restoring equilibrium in small, precise ways. There was no rivalry in the way humans imagined it. No posturing for attention. But there was tension. Not between them. Around me. They spoke to each other in low tones. Fragments of history, fragments of memory. Words about fleets. About betrayal. About the moment preservation protocols activated and their world disappeared into silence. And through it all, they kept looking back at me. Not constantly. Not obsessively. Just checking. as if recalibrating their understanding of reality around the presence of something unexpected. A human, unarmed, unaugmented, standing in the center of their resurrection. I turned back to the control interface, trying to focus on power distribution curves instead of the awareness pressing quietly against my back. That's when I realized something else. They weren't watching me like a rescuer. They were watching me like a variable. And they were deciding what that meant. The archive core was buried beneath the cryo-stasis controls. I wouldn't have found it if Vale hadn't noticed the power routing discrepancy. Too much energy for simple life support. Sally's guided my hands across the interface, her memory of Imperial systems surfacing with uncomfortable clarity. Preservation arrays of this scale, she said quietly, require documentation. Empires love paperwork, I muttered. The hidden partition unfolded in layers of encryption older than my species' first orbital station. My contractor license shouldn't have been enough to breach it. But the Empire was gone. And abandoned systems forget who they're meant to obey. The archive opened. Imperial crest. Authorization tier. Sovereign directive. The language was sterile. Structured. Void of emotion. Subject population. High caste strategic cohort. Designation. Matriarchal command lineage. Assessment. Ideological contamination risk. Irreversible. Recommended action. Termination. My jaw tightened. The next line overrode it. Revised directive. Public destruction deemed destabilizing. Symbolic value too significant. Alternative action authorized. I scrolled. Conversion into long-term cryogenic display. Distributed across remote Imperial holdings. Status. Preserved. Consciousness suspended. Purpose. Converted into a living warning. Behind me, the chamber hummed softly. 1,000 preserved figures. Not executed. Displayed. Destruction is loud. Preservation can be crueler. I read further. The women in this vault weren't civilians. They weren't random detainees. They were leaders, fleet tacticians, scientists, planetary governors. A cultural backbone that had opposed imperial consolidation. They had refused assimilation mandates. Refused to relinquish autonomous governance. So the Empire had rewritten the narrative. No martyrs. No massacres. Just disappearance. Official record entry. Strategic cohort voluntarily entered stasis pending integration review. The lie was elegant. No bloodshed to rally around. No bodies to bury. Just absence. Elira stepped closer to the projection, her expression unreadable as lines of bureaucratic cruelty scrolled past. They erased the war, she said softly. Vale's hands curled into fists, though her voice remained level. They feared what we represented. Sally's watched the text without blinking. Continuity, she said. We were continuity. The archive displayed a final notation. Reactivation protocol. Prohibited. Violation classification. Treason against imperial stability. I leaned back against the console. Treason. For pressing a maintenance override. My chest felt tight, not explosive anger, not dramatic fury. Just a slow, spreading heat under the ribs. Quiet. Controlled. They hadn't been frozen to protect them. They had been frozen to silence them. I looked across the chamber again. 997 still sleeping. I'd woken 3 out of 1,000. Guilt settled in, not because I'd done wrong, but because I'd done so little. I thought this was an archive, I said quietly. Sally's turned toward me. It is. Her gaze shifted to the rows. An archive of dissent. The system display pulsed softly, awaiting further input. Reactivation sequences lined the interface like dormant stars. Vale studied my face. You are recalculating, she observed. Yeah. This knowledge places you in opposition to the Empire. The Empire's dust, I replied. Sally's expression didn't change. Its systems remain. She wasn't wrong. Automated enforcement. Dormant watchdog AIs. Hidden beacons that might still listen for unauthorized activity. I looked down at my hands. Human. Unshielded. unimposing, and standing in the center of a prison disguised as preservation. The Empire hadn't built a vault. They'd built a monument. 1,000 leaders frozen in perfect silence to remind the galaxy what happened to those who resisted. My throat felt dry. "I woke you because your pod was failing," I said. Celes stepped closer, her presence steady. "You woke me," she replied, "because you do not accept unnecessary endings." That wasn't heroism. It was maintenance logic. Broken systems get repaired. I turned back to the console. The interface didn't look like an archive anymore. It looked like a control panel. And beneath the cold bureaucratic language, beneath the legal warnings and sovereign directives, I understood something with absolute clarity. This station wasn't preserving history. It was containing it. It wasn't a relic site. It was a prison. My contract was still open on my wrist display. Outpost K, 47, Legacy Infrastructure Maintenance. Scope, Reactor Calibration, Drone Oversight, Cryo-Support Stabilization. Restrictions, do not interfere with archived Imperial assets. Penalty, immediate blacklisting. Asset seizure. Civil liability. Do not interfere. I stared at the words while the chamber hummed quietly around us. 3 revived. 997 suspended. Archived Imperial assets. That's what the Empire had reduced them to. Celes stood at my left, hands folded loosely behind her back. Vale remained in motion, scanning the chamber perimeter again as if expecting enforcement drones to descend at any moment. Elira adjusted another environmental node, ensuring the revived pods weren't drawing excessive power from the primary grid. They weren't pressuring me. They weren't asking. That somehow made it heavier. I opened the power distribution matrix. Reactor 3's anomaly wasn't random. The system had been compensating, shifting energy into sublevel 9 automatically when Pod 347 destabilized. The station was designed to preserve all units indefinitely, but only under minimal neural activity. Full revival would spike consumption by 400%. At first glance, impossible. I ran the numbers again. Reactor 1, operating at 62% capacity. Reactor 2, 58%. Reactor 3, 71%. Mining drones were dormant this cycle. External comm arrays were on passive standby. Half the station systems were idling because no one had used them in centuries. The capacity was there. Barely. Sustaining 1,000 conscious beings would require rerouting non-essential systems, disabling beacon relays, cannibalizing auxiliary reserves meant for long-haul cargo that would never arrive. It would also flag the station as operationally altered. Any surviving Imperial watchdog could notice. "Your species calculates risk quickly," Celes observed quietly. "It calculates cost," I replied. Vale stopped pacing. "And the cost?" I rotated the projection so they could see. "If I wake all of you at once, the reactors will strain. We'll have to shut down external communications entirely. No outgoing signals." "That is preferable," Vale said immediately. "It also means no rescue, no supply chain, no easy exit," I continued. "We'd be isolated. Completely." Elira's gaze softened. "You are already isolated." She wasn't wrong. Billions of kilometers from the nearest human. 6 months of solitude pay. No oversight. No witnesses. The contract terms glowed faintly on my display. "Do not interfere." I thought about the line in the archive. Converted into a living warning. I thought about the neat bureaucratic phrasing. The elegant lie. The cold efficiency of making leaders disappear without bloodshed. Destruction is loud. Preservation can be crueler. "I can stage the awakenings," I said finally. "Sequential releases. 10 at a time. Let the reactors stabilize between cycles. It'll take hours." Celes studied the projection. "And the structural strain?" "Manageable. If I reroute life support from unused sectors." Vale's eyes sharpened. "You are outlining a liberation." "I'm outlining a systems modification." Celes' gaze held mine. "You understand that once begun, it cannot be concealed." "Yes." You understand that any remnant authority detecting this will classify you as hostile.
Yes.
And you understand, she added gently, that this is not required of you. That was the part that lingered. It wasn't required. No oath. No allegiance. No shared history. Just a maintenance contract and 1,000 frozen lives. I reviewed the numbers one last time. Energy curves. Thermal thresholds. Fail-safes I could bypass if necessary. It was possible. Not easy. Not safe. But possible. I exhaled slowly. I don't know what you'll build after this, I said. I don't know what happens when 1,000 leaders wake up in a galaxy that erased them. Vale's voice was steady. We will adapt. Elira nodded faintly. We always did. Celes said nothing. She simply watched me. The contract warning blinked again, as if reminding me of its authority. Do not interfere. I closed the document. If it can be done, I said quietly, more to myself than to them, then it must be done. No declarations. No dramatic vows. Just a conclusion. I opened the master cryo-stasis control. Batch revival protocol. Disabled. Manual override. Available. Estimated power surge. Severe. Confirm sequential activation. Around me, the chamber remained still, rows upon rows of silent figures waiting in frozen suspension. Behind me, 3 pairs of silver eyes watched without speaking. My finger hovered over the confirmation key. And for the first time since arriving at Outpost K-47, the station didn't feel abandoned. It felt like it was holding its breath. I pressed confirm. For half a second, nothing happened. Then the station roared. Reactor output spiked so fast the deck vibrated beneath my boots. Power conduits along the chamber walls flared white-blue, energy surging into the cryostasis grid. Frost fractured across hundreds of pod surfaces at once, thin cracks racing like lightning through ice. Stabilizing surge, I muttered, eyes locked on the power curves. Come on, hold. The first wave triggered. 10 pods. Coolant vented in hissing spirals, vapor flooding the chamber floor in rolling clouds. Lids split open with hydraulic sighs. Bodies convulsed. Air returned to lungs that hadn't drawn breath in centuries. Gasps. Sharp, ragged. Coughing. Confused movements. Vale was already moving, steady hands bracing the nearest woman as she stumbled forward. Celes stepped into another opening pod, speaking low and calm in their language, anchoring, orienting. Elira caught someone whose legs failed her, lowering her gently to the floor. Breathe, Elira whispered. You are alive. The silence is over. The second wave initiated automatically. Another 10. Then another. The chamber filled with sound. Not chaos. Life. Breaths pulled too hard. Voices cracking with disuse. Some wept quietly without understanding why. Others stood in stunned stillness, silver eyes scanning the impossible sight of open pods and moving bodies. I watched the power draw like a man monitoring a failing dam. Temperature holding. Structural integrity stable, I said aloud, though no one had asked. Sequential activation rolled outward in concentric arcs. Rows that had been museum still for centuries came alive in rippling motion. Frost cascaded to the floor in crystalline sheets. Coolant pooled and drained through grates long unused. 1,000 preserved warnings becoming 1,000 waking minds. The air shifted from sterile cold to something warmer, thick with breath, with voices, with presence. Women helped women. Those who steadied first turned immediately to those still disoriented. Hands reached without hesitation. Names were spoken softly, urgently, like anchors thrown across time. No one pushed forward. No one demanded answers first. They restored each other. Vale lifted one woman easily to her feet, her earlier fire redirected into protection. Celes moved like a fixed point in a storm, answering questions in measured tones. Elira knelt beside another, wiping condensation from her face with the edge of her own sleeve. I stood at the console, overwhelmed by the scale of it. 1,000 isn't a number. It's 1,000 futures restarting. Each pod represented a strategist, a scientist, a leader erased from history and placed on display as a warning. Each breath drawn now was a thread reintroduced into the fabric of a galaxy that had declared them gone. The noise built, not disorder, but emotion long deferred. Some cried openly when they understood. Some closed their eyes and simply breathed. Some looked upward at the vaulted ceiling, as if expecting the Empire to descend in outrage. No one came. I barely noticed when the final activation cycle cued. "Last sector," I whispered. Energy reserves dipped into auxiliary storage. Non-essential systems across the station powered down, external lights dimming, communication arrays going dark. Everything redirected inward. To this chamber. To them. The final row ignited. Pods split. Coolant drained. The last preserved figures stirred. Silence rippled gradually through the chamber, not absence of sound, but collective awareness. Those already standing turned to watch the final awakenings. As if witnessing a birth. One by one, the last 10 emerged. And then, the master console chimed. Cryo-stasis array status. All units, active. Preservation mode, terminated. Across the chamber, the final pod indicator shifted from blue to green. 999 others already glowing the same. I looked up from the console. 1,000 silver eyes looked back. Not worship. Not dependency. Recognition. I hadn't meant to become anything. But standing there, a lone human in a sea of resurrected history, I understood the weight settling quietly onto my shoulders. Responsibility. Behind me, the last pod light turned green. It took 3 days to make the station spaceworthy again. 1,000 conscious beings changed the math of everything. We reactivated dormant hangars, cannibalized freight modules into temporary transports, repurposed mining haulers into atmospheric shuttles. The station, silent for centuries, became a coordinated lattice of motion and intent. They worked with precision. Not frantically. Not vengefully. Purposefully. Sales helped organize departure groups by expertise, navigation clusters, engineering cadres, diplomatic contingents. Vale oversaw security sweeps of every system before launch, ensuring no dormant Imperial subroutine remained to betray them. Alira coordinated medical stabilization for those whose bodies needed more time to adjust. There were no speeches. No raised banners. Just preparation. When the first shuttle detached from Outpost K-47, it did so quietly. Engines flared white against the ice moon's darkness, then curved toward distant trade routes long since altered. Others followed in measured intervals. Each launch reduced the density of presence aboard the station. Corridors that had echoed with 1,000 new voices gradually returned to something closer to silence, but not the sterile, preserved kind. A living quiet. Some of them paused before departure. Not to kneel. Not to pledge. Simply to stand in front of me for a moment. A hand to the forearm. A nod. A steady look. Acknowledgement. Vale approached before boarding her assigned vessel. She studied me the same way she had upon waking, evaluating, recalibrating. "You altered our trajectory," she said. "You'll do the rest," I replied. A faint curve touched her mouth. Not a smile exactly. Approval. "We will." She turned and left without ceremony. Alira lingered longer. She adjusted the collar of my jacket, brushing away a line of frost that wasn't there anymore. "You are less cold now," she said softly. "Station's warmer." She shook her head once, as if that wasn't what she meant. Then she boarded. Sales was among the last to prepare for departure. She joined me in the observation bay overlooking the ice moon's fractured surface. "Our civilization will not resemble what it was," she said. "Nothing ever does," I replied. She looked at me for a long moment. "You did not act for power." "No." "You did not act for reward." "No." She inclined her head. "Then you acted freely." The final transport under her coordination powered up. She did not board it. Instead, she transferred command authority to another. I frowned slightly. "You're missing your shuttle." "Yes," she said. The hangar emptied gradually until only one small craft remained docked, and the station returned to a scale I recognized. Billions of kilometers from the nearest human. But not alone. "You're staying?" I asked. "For now." Why? She considered the question seriously, not romantically, not impulsively. Because this is a threshold, she said. And you stand at it. That's not a reason. It is sufficient. There was no debt in her tone. No obligation. Just choice. Outside the viewport, the last departing shuttle vanished into the starfield. Engine flare faded. Silence settled, not hollow, but open. The station systems hummed at sustainable levels again. Reactors steady. External arrays still dark. I leaned against the console railing. I didn't free them for gratitude, I said. Saley stood beside me, gaze fixed on the distant curve of the ice moon. I pressed a button because it was right. She nodded once. The rest, I added quietly, was their choice. And in the vastness beyond the station hull, 1,000 futures moved outward into the dark. She remained.